Hello everyone, this is Dan the Panini Man, and I'm back for my first video in a long while. So, as I mentioned in the announcement I made recently, I had to step off of everything because of school and class and all sorts of work I had, and it being too stressful to invent my own stories while also doing that. So, I'm incredibly sorry that I had to leave, but I really just didn't have a choice. I couldn't prioritize this over my schoolwork, no matter how much I loved doing it. And I was getting severe burnout because I was writing my own stories, and it was taking a lot of work and taking too much time, and I was too stressed about video deadlines. So I just had to stop. But now I'm coming back, and I've come up with a far better idea, which is that I'm not actually going to be writing stories. I'm going to be reading fanfics and turning them to audio format, which I feel like is a helpful thing to do because not everyone has time to read, but if they can listen to something, that'll be helpful. I'm going to be going for Percy Jackson fanfics because I know they're very well liked, but also, after some research, I found that there's really not that many on the internet, like audio recordings. So that'll be very good. Now, I apologize for rambling too long, and let's get into the first story. So this will be this series is called Percy Jackson Too Powerful, and it's on fanfiction.net, and it's by Chaos Theory 1994. I'm going to send this to I'm going to put the link to the first chapter in the description, and I'm going to be going through a couple chapters now, and we'll see where we stop. So without further ado, let's go ahead. This is an alternate universe story and set after Heroes of Olympus. Chapter 1. Deep in the north, in one of the expansive forests of Canada, sat a small, one-room log cabin. The cabin appeared only a few years old. Smoke billowed up from the chimney, signaling that someone lived there. Rustling in the forest echoed throughout the small valley in which the cabin stood. The noise creased as a large elk appeared before running off at the approach of the sound of footsteps behind it. The noise stopped as two young girls, dressed in silver hunting outfits, stood in the clearing. They had stopped their hunt when they stumbled upon the log cabin. "What do we do now?" the younger of the two asked. The other girl, her spiky black hair fluttering in the morning breeze, glared at the cabin before she turned to the other girl. "We go around it. No need to start something." The other girl nodded as she started to make her way around the right of the cabin to continue her pursuit of the elk. The other girl walked towards the left side. Both girls stopped as the cabin door opened. The tall man exited the cabin. He had long black hair and a beard to match. They couldn't make out his eyes, but they knew that he saw them. Both girls aimed their bows and arrows at the man, earning an audible exhale of air from the man. "You come to my home and aim weapons at me? Not very friendly." The older girl frowned. "We don't take kindly to men." The man chuckled. "I can see that," as he said. He stared at his two sets of bows and quivers aimed at his heart. The older girl frowned. The voice sounded familiar. Before she could ask a question, a young girl, about 12 girls of age, exited the forest. Her auburn hair pulled into a ponytail, and her silver bow was pulled back, a matching arrow ready to be let loose. "Why?" the girl began before she laid eyes on the man before them. "Who are you?" The man frowned. The shadows on his face cleared as the sun moved to the sky. His sea-green eyes narrowed at the sight of the auburn girl. "I could say the same thing. A little north for you, don't you think, Artemis?" The young girl gasped at the voice and those sea-green eyes, the same eyes she could never forget. Those eyes that she hadn't seen since that fateful day on Mount Olympus. "Perseus," she said, just above a whisper. The spiky-haired girl nearly dropped her bow. "Percy?" she questioned. The man, Percy as he was known, turned to stare at his cousin. He sighed tiredly. "Hi, Atals." The girl's electric blue eyes flashed with anger as she raised her bow and fired. The arrow straight and true to its target. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the man was not defenseless. He raised the hand and the arrow stopped mid-air. Tali's eyes grew in surprise. The other girl fired her arrow as well, but it too stopped in mid-air by an unseen force. Artemis raised her bow but stopped. "I see that power of yours has grown." Percy's glare heightened. The arrows broke apart and fell to the ground. Why are you here? You gods have done enough to me, taken enough from me. Artemis's glare softened. Talia, on the other hand, just looked between Percy and Artemis. What is he talking about, milady? Artemis knew that there wasn't an easy way to say this. All of the gods and Perseus had been sworn to secret about the decision, a decision she was not proud to say she supported. Talia and Alexander, you must both swear on the sticks that you will not repeat what I'm about to tell you. Alexander completed her oath, but Talia faltered. Artemis sent her lieutenant a pointed look. Talia sighed and stated the oath. Artemis sighed before she began the tale. Beginning a flashback. After the battle against Gaia, the gods of Olympus had returned to Mount Olympus. The gods had given out their thanks and awards to the demigods of the Seven, but they had asked Perseus to remain. They had to speak with the boy about his time in Tartarus. The others of the Seven left the throne room. The gods transported them back to Camp Half-Blood. An action that gave a terrifying foreboding to the Seven, especially Annabeth Chase. What did the gods want with her boyfriend? Once the throne room doors closed, the gods turned their gaze to the son of Poseidon. Zeus cleared his throat. It has come to our attention that during your time in Tartarus, you showed a new ability. Percy sighed. He didn't want to think about it. Percy nodded. I controlled the poison when Achelous tried to kill Annabeth and me. Poseidon leaned forward in his throne. How is that possible? Zeus turned to stare at his brother. I was about to ask you, Poseidon. Poseidon glared at the insinuation. What are you getting at, brother? I think you know. Did you keep this ability hidden from us? My lord, my father knew nothing of this power. I didn't know I could do it until I did. I'd never had this power before, Percy said, defending his father from the paranoia of his uncle Zeus. Regarded the son of his brother, the boy had shown him disrespect in the past. The boy showed up his own children with power and abilities. Now the boy had even more power. I see you have turned down godhood before, and now your powers have grown. It appears that my previous concern have come to fruition. This boy is dangerous. He must be put in check. Poseidon stood from his throne. You will not hurt my child. Percy, Apollo, Aphrodite, and Athena stood up in protest at their father's words. Zeus frowned. The boy can either become a god, or he can be exiled. The gods that stood stand down. Even Poseidon. Percy glared at his father. Poseidon slunk back into his throne. You have a choice, Zeus continued. You either become a god, You have a choice, Zeus continued. You either become a god, or you'll be exiled from the lands of the gods. Percy clenched his fists, his heart beating fast in his chest. He dug his nails into the palm of his hands. Blood dripped from his hands on the marble floor of the throne room. Percy, please, just choose godhood, Poseidon pleaded. Percy's eyes narrowed. With a move of his hand, Poseidon flew out of the throne room on the marble floor. The gods gasped. You are not my father, Percy spat. Poseidon stood up, a look of shock and awe stretched across his face at his son's powers. See, the boy is too powerful, Zeus declared. Percy took a few breaths. Can I at least say goodbye to my friends and family? Zeus laughed. You are in no place to dictate terms, boy. You just attacked a god, your father no less. Percy raised his hand, but before he could do anything, a bright light surrounded him, and before he knew where he was going, he was flashed away to Canada and outside of the land of gods. Percy turned to walk across the border, but an unseen barrier blocked his way. He looked down at the ground, tears began to leak from his eyes. As he beat his fists against the barrier, he fell to his knees, sobbing at the loss of his family, his home, his friends, his wise girl. Flashback ends. The tale ended. Talia had stared at Percy during the entire tale. You said that he accepted godhood, that he was too good to talk to his friends and he didn't have to travel the world. Percy turned his eyes to Artemis. His green eyes narrowed at the goddess. That was Zeus's story, that I accepted godhood? Do any of you have the courage to accept your actions? Artemis wanted to glare at the boy, but she knew he was right. They had used the story to shift the blame on him, to label him as an arrogant boy. She and the others knew the truth. They were scared, afraid that the demigods would hate them, that her hunters would hate her. Of course you are right. We were afraid. Afraid that the demigods would hate us, that my hunters would hate me. Percy was taken aback. The goddess had admitted her fear. He looked down at the ground. Just leave me be, he said as he turned to walk back into his cabin. What? No. We're not going to leave you, Talia yelled. Percy stopped and stared sadly at his cousin. You said your oath and there is nothing that can be done. I'm exiled from my home. Just leave me alone. He closed the cabin door behind him. Talia turned to Artemis. We can't just leave him here, she yelled. Artemis nearly flinched at the tone of her lieutenant. Her sister. Perseus is right. There is nothing we can do. Only the council can end his exile, and our father would never do that. Artemis motioned towards Alexandra. The two made their way back into the forest. Talia stood her ground. Artemis stopped and turned to glare at Talia. Talia, come back to camp. Talia didn't move. That is an order. Talia flinched at the tone of voice that Artemis gave her. Talia looked at the door one last time. A tear ran down her cheek. She turned and followed her patron. Percy sat in his cabin. He heard everything that Talia had said out the door. He cried for the first time in months. He sobbed, his heart shattering again at all he'd lost. Manhattan, New York City. Annabeth Chase sat in the subway car reading her architecture book. She had a test tomorrow. She was well into a year at first year at Columbia University. After he'd run out on her and his family, Annabeth wouldn't leave New York. She wouldn't leave Sally like he had done. She gripped the book harder, nearly ripping it in half. She took a deep breath. She had to get back to her home. She lived with Sally and Paul. They were both so good to her, like the parents she'd always wanted. She would visit her dad and stepmom, but New York was home, and Sal and Polly were family. The train stopped. She exited the car and made her way onto the ground streets above. She sighed, looking at it all. Of the tall buildings, she walked down the street until she made it home. She took the elevator up to the 18th floor. She exited the elevator and looked out the window in the hallway. It looked out over Central Park. Sally's first book had sold 10 million copies, and she had just finished her second book. A few months back, it was a bestseller already, with 5 million copies sold. Sally bought the current apartment about 6 months ago, and they were all very happy. Who wouldn't be? It overlooked Central Park and was only a few blocks from the museums, which Annabeth would go to once a week just to escape all the stress of school. She smiled at the view. Before she turned and walked to the apartment door, she took out her keys, unlocked the door, opened the door, and smiled at the smell of freshly baked cookies that Sally had placed on the table to cool. Annabeth dropped her backpack on the ground, grabbing a cookie and popping it in her mouth. Her eyes closed at the warm, sweet chocolate flavor that overwhelmed her taste buds. Hello, dear. How was school? Sally said sincerely. Annabeth turned, smiling at the older and beautiful woman that stood before her. Even in an apron with flour on one of her cheeks, Sally was beautiful. Even now when she was in her mid-40s, Annabeth could only guess how beautiful she had been when she met Poseidon. She flinched a little when she thought of the god of the sea. Not because of the rivalry with her mother, but the fact that the thought of the sea god always brought back Percy. Sally had seen the change in mood. She knew Annabeth was thinking of Percy. She rushed forward, pulling the young woman into a motherly embrace. It's okay, dear, she soothed Annabeth, held onto her, letting the sorrow engulf her. She wouldn't let anyone else see the side of her except for Sally, not even Talia. I miss him so much, she said. Sally rubbed the back of her neck. I do too. Why did he go? Sally had asked the question herself for over 2 years. How could her son accept godhood and not even try to see her Annabeth? I don't know. It doesn't seem like something he'd do. Annabeth pulled away from the embrace, wiping the tears back with her hand. He broke his promise. He's no better than Luke. Sally frowned, but she knew that Annabeth had gone through with Luke. I still believe he wouldn't do that. Annabeth straightened her posture. A serious expression crossed her face. You don't think the gods told us everything. Sally looked around, not wanting anyone to hear what she truly thought. It was time that Annabeth was the right person to reveal the secret. I'm not a clear-sighted mortal, she said, as she also respited a spell that her mother had taught her long ago, one to remove her from the sight of the gods. Annabeth's gray eyes widened at the words and what Sally had just revealed. I'm a demigod, but not like you. What? Annabeth asked, a little louder than she meant to. Sally smiled. My parents died in a plane crash, but the woman that died on the plane, although my birth mother, she was not truly human. My real mother took the form of my birth mother. She became human to procreate, to give this world a hero, one to win the prophecy. Annabeth was totally floored by that announcement. Why couldn't she just come back to you like your father or any other goddess? Sally smiled. Annabeth was so smart. Because my mother does not have a humanoid form. In reality, she is the great void at the center of the universe. She is chaos. Annabeth's jaw fell open. Sally was the demigod child of chaos? Why didn't you protect Percy instead of marrying Gabe? Why didn't you kill the Minotaur instead of letting it capture us? Sally's smile only widened. You are truly the greatest daughter of Athena. Annabeth blushed at that praise. My powers are limited. I was just a vessel to allow part of my mother's power to flow to my son. I can do some magic, like this spell, but for the most part, I'm human. I don't know what to say, Annabeth admitted. Hope welled up inside Annabeth's heart. She wanted to be mad at Sally for keeping the secret, but mostly, she'd felt honored to be the one Sally had told. Above everything else, I will keep your secret. Thank you for telling me. Sally leaned forward and kissed Annabeth on the forehead. I love you like my very own. You deserve to have this secret. I love you, my dear. A tear ran down Annabeth's cheek. She quickly wiped it away before she hugged the older woman. If you won't give up on him, then I won't either, she whispered, making Sally smile in content. And that is the end of chapter 1. So, based on how you guys react, I'll do chapter 2. And if you guys want, I can do 2 chapters in one video. This is just a video to kind of test the waters and see what you guys think. So, without further ado, I will see you all in a future video. Goodbye.